Chapter 3.8, Part 3, Impressionism. So we get into Impressionism. Remember, back to Manet, he is rejected, and the Impressionists, by and large, are rejected. And they're kind of also rejecting. They're rejected by the Academy. They're also rejecting the Academy. So they change gears quite a bit, although realism is influencing their ideas, such as using scenes from everyday life. That's one of their things they do. They paint in plein air outdoors, and this is because they now have tubes of paint. Paint in a tube, like we've all seen, like a tube of toothpaste, didn't exist until around the time of the Impressionists in the late 1800s. Then quick sketch-like brushstrokes, that's another one of their indicators when you're looking at Impressionism. And often it's built up in impasto, meaning thick paint, and has a three-dimensional quality to it. And their big thing is to depict lights of effects, of light, atmosphere, and color theory gets into their work, optical mixing. So we're going to look at first Renoir, Bal du Moulin de la Galette. So this is a beer garden is what we're looking at outdoors. So this is outdoors, and in Europe this is very common. So here we are in France, probably in Paris. And these middle-class people that now exist because of the Industrial Revolution, they're not poor, they're not rich, they are middle-class, lower to, working people that have some free time. And they're dancing in this sort of open area outside under these trees, and there's some light fixtures hung from who knows what. But these are probably gas lit bulbs, and they're drinking beer and wine and whatever, and they're socializing. Okay, so this is a group of people we didn't really see very much before this time. The realists are a little bit more toward, not poverty, but more rural life and harsh conditions, that kind of thing, and poverty. The Impressionists are really about the joy of the outdoors and nature and people as well, but in a natural setting. Okay, so they're outdoors, these actual artists sitting there with a portable easel, portable materials such as tubes of paint, and they're painting what they see. The other thing that's important to them is the time of day, capturing the quality of light that is actually there. Previous to this, we might have painted out these sort of shadows, like those little circles of light that are coming through the trees. Does that make sense? So you have this dappled light coming through the trees, and the artist is painting this in, Renoir is painting this in so that we see this dappled sunlight. One of the other things that Renoir does here is he doesn't put black where he might with this clothing. He kind of makes it bluish or purplish. So it doesn't have as heavy of a feel in here, okay? So popular outdoor cafe, beauty and pleasure, middle class, nature, outdoors, but it's also people. It's not just landscapes. Some of the influence, there's many influences on the Impressionists. One of them is the Japanese prints that are coming to them from Japan, and there's quite a bit of art fairs like the Salon, but there's also world fairs, like where people come of multiple countries and they show off their speciality of that country. They might come in native dress and that kind of thing. So that's starting to happen in Europe. So you're getting an exposure to all these different cultures in the 19th century. This one is from the 18th century, so this is an older print. But this type of print would be one of the things the Impressionists would have seen. Mary Cassatt, she's an American that goes to France and does some training. She trains with Manet, and she trains with some other people. And she produces paintings that are a little bit different. And some of the women in the Impressionist era, and there's only two notable ones, and Mary Cassatt is one. Berthe Morisot, a French woman, is another. They don't have as much access to the academy that the men do. Now, I know I'm saying that the Impressionists reject the academy, but they were initially academy trained. So they've had nude models to draw from, and they've had all this training. And so Mary Cassatt has to kind of figure things out, not entirely on her own, but she's not going to have a male body to paint or draw. So she's going to paint perhaps like an intimate scene with a mother and child. And that's what her choices would be. So a couple things are happening here. She's finding this really interesting with this flattening of space and the lines sort of drawn on top of the fabric and the flattening of the fabric. So she has all this patterning going on here with the carpet and the wallpaper and the chest of drawers in her dress, and she's making her dress a bit more flat and just a pattern. The child is more volumetric and the head of the mother, but everything else is a bit flatter than you might previously have seen. She's not trying to emphasize the three-dimensionality here in the woman and then the fabric and so on, only really in the child, so you focus on the child. That's her subject. Also, different angles and strange composition. I don't mean strange, but I mean placement of bodies. She's getting that from the Japanese. And we're also looking straight down into the bowl more, a little bit from the side, and then we're looking straight to the child. So it's kind of an odd tilting of this bowl that doesn't really happen in the real world. Another thing is cropping. This whole vase is not even in there. Her dress is not completely in there. That's something that the Japanese do. This woman is cropped here, and part of her headdress is cropped. And it's also, photography is influencing this as well with the cropping. Okay, so she saw Utamaro's prints in 1890, and this we're looking at her painting in 1893. So there's asymmetry, there's slanted viewpoints, diagonals, some action that's kind of subtle, cropped and bold outlines, flattened space, lack of modeling, which is our three-dimensionality, and our bright colors and busy patterns. So we're going to go back and look at our patterns, lots of patterning, diagonals. So the mother is kind of tilting over and the child is going to the side, and this is our two musicians here, our two courtesans interacting kind of at a diagonal here. Okay, so we're going to go on to Degas. Now this is Blue Dancers, and you're going to see the same thing that influence a little bit from Japanese prints, also photography, in the sense that this is cropped here and this is cropped here. We don't see her face. We don't see the whole of her head. It's right up to her arm there. Now, in photography, you're going to photograph perhaps multiple people, and if you're not posing everybody, you're kind of from a live scene, and this is supposed to be live. This is an indoor scene of women dancing. So the last two we looked at are indoor scenes. So some of the Impressionists are not exactly outdoors. There's some of the time where they go back and forth. Degas liked to be watching people, and he liked to watch the dancers and young women a lot. So he's got this cropping from photography, same thing with this patterning and a bit of flattening and those outlines like the Japanese prints. And the other thing is he's kind of looking down on this composition, maybe from a higher up space, and that's a really unusual thing. Usually you're just in the space in a normal kind of way to the side and looking at them, but he's got kind of a bird's eye view here. So yeah, he's known for his female subjects, dancers and bathers, and the pastel. I don't really get into that too much, but you see how this sort of stripy marks of his pastel crayon here. he's leaving those marks in, and that's part of our impressionism, where there's optical mixing. He's not really making a blue greenish color. He's kind of letting you mix that with your eye by putting the yellow and the blue next to each other. You're making the eye. That's called optical mixing in your brain. Okay, so this is interesting, this daguerreotype. Now, Mr. Daguerre here of the daguerreotype, 1838. Oh my God, so early. Well, it's funny because some people really think that photography started in the 1860s. Some people don't understand that there never was photography in the Renaissance. I don't know. Anyway, seems a bit confusing. But 1838, very, very early photograph. So this is not a widely known way to do anything in the world. Not everybody has a camera yet. That doesn't happen for another 60 years, okay? So 1938, here we are in France, and this Boulevard du Temple is a very busy boulevard. But what's happened here, it looks empty because you have to leave the shutter open for so long. The exposure takes a long time to imprint on the chemicals. And in that way, he's left it open so long that all those people and horse and carriage and all that stuff moving are not imprinted there because they move through the space. So it looks like an empty street, except if we look right here. There is a man getting his shoes shined. Now he's a little blurry by his head and his shoulders, but the shoe shine guy and the stand are very crisp because they likely weren't moving that much. So he took the time, however long the exposure was, and I don't exactly know, maybe 10 minutes or longer even. The shoe shine guy was there long enough to show up in the photo. Everybody else moved through. Isn't that wild? So it looks like an empty street. It is not, but he has captured this moment in time on film. And that is starting to influence the Impressionists. And again, we go back to our portraiture, and we're talking about who's doing portraits, and we've come to feel, painters are starting to feel, well, I don't need to worry about reality anymore. Photography's got that covered. I'm going to go into trying to capture daylight and time of day. And it's a little bit also to imitate photography, but it's also now they're freed up from photography, from worrying about highly detailed renderings. So this is Berthe Morisot, another woman painter at this time, and she does this beach scene at Nice. And another part of Impressionism is not really finishing it. It works in a lot of ways like the optical mixing. If a person observing an artwork has to finish the painting in their mind, it makes the viewer, the other person, more active in the process, and you get more of an attachment to these images. But you can see her optical mixing here too. She's leaving the canvas bare right here, but then these areas of purple and white, and she's showing these shadows, but they're very loose and very, impressionistic. So we're seeing light and color, quick brush strokes, and plein air means it's outdoor, and a subject could be Morisot's daughter, we don't know for sure. Caillebotte, Paris Street, Rainy Day. He is not as indicative of the Impressionist style because it's pretty detailed, and like if you look at these stones, I mean, they're pretty well rendered. Now, rendered means, accurately detailed. When something's rendered, you've done the truth of it. You've really tried to capture the realisticness of it. But he was a big patron and supporter and bought a lot of Impressionist paintings, so he sort of, I wouldn't say he gets included only for that reason, but that is a reason. So his subject matter is a little different. He's a little more high class. So he's showing upper class people kind of in the midst of other, perhaps lower class people, but we can't see them very well up close. But you look at the sky, and he's got some modeling in there and some optical mixing happening where there's just splotches of color But the rest of the painting in the foreground, it's a bit more detailed than you might normally see. So he also makes use of linear perspective. So Monet, he is the biggie. He is Mr. Impressionism. The whole genre, the whole ism was named after one of his paintings, Impression, Sunrise. And he is just so productive and at it, just constantly painting. He creates a garden with water in his home. He buys an estate and he builds it over the years. You could say he's as obsessed with the actual garden as he is about painting it at certain points in time. And he builds up with this Japanese bridge. You've seen that perhaps. And he just paints these lilies and this lily pads and these water scenes over and over and over. He wanted his own space to paint, so he didn't have to go and look for subjects, if that makes sense. And he wants to paint water, and he wants to paint flowers, and he wants to paint nature. So he does this particular piece during World War I, actually exactly during World War I. Huge long piece, and it was installed in the Musée de l'Orangerie, Paris, and I haven't seen this. I really want to see this. But it's a whole room. It's a wraparound experience of his water lilies. So he focused on series over and over and over. He did cathedrals different times of day. So there's these beautiful, multiples of these different scenes painted from the exact same place sometimes, where he's in the same seat, different time of day, different coloration, just gorgeous. But this is 8 paintings made for 2 oval rooms. So we're going to get into post-impressionism. I'll come back.